I'm very pleased to be able to join you today by video for this important forum on telework in the Australian public service. We all know that technology has changed enormously. Thanks to our smartphones, tablets and laptops, more and more of us now have the technology to do our jobs any place, anytime. The rapid development in ICT and broadband connectivity has the potential to transform how and where we work, and that can be a very good thing. But of course, working remotely needs more than just technology. After all, for at least 15 years now, it has been possible to work from home and remote locations using a telephone and a computer. Depending upon the nature of the work that you are doing, it has in fact been possible for very much longer, particularly if you are deliberately choosing to work from home to get some quiet time on a big project. But when we speak of teleworking, we tend to mean working at a location remote from the office, but connected to the office and to fellow workers through telecommunications networks. We need to be careful when we think about telework to avoid the kind of naive enthusiasm that you sometimes see when it comes to technology. The assumption that if we have the technology to do something, that means the something will happen naturally. If you'll forgive me making a slightly political observation, the previous government was very keen on this kind of thinking when it came to the national broadband network. This kind of argument glides over a basic logical distinction which was hammered into my head in first year philosophy at Sydney University, the difference between a necessary and a sufficient condition. The same distinction applies when we think about telework. In other words, it might be a necessary condition for telework to flourish that the network and the equipment are available to us, but it's not a sufficient condition. We also need a culture, a workplace culture, that facilitates telework. In Australia, we have a pretty good rate of technology uptake, but we've tended to lag a little bit in translating that into management innovation through new business processes and through new workplace arrangements. The Cisco Value Index for Innovation shows that Australia is failing to keep up with other OECD nations and the rising economies of China, India and Brazil in embracing some of the new digital opportunities to transform businesses and government services. As the Minister for Communications has said, we have the technology to make workplaces more flexible, but management is lacking the imagination to make it happen. Research has consistently shown that telework can deliver higher productivity, reduced costs, and greater attraction and retention of skilled staff. And today, many employees have the necessary equipment and connectivity to work from home or remotely from the office. Equipment such as a computer, which is networked to the office over DSL or even wireless, very possibly equipped with a camera and video conferencing software, and certainly a telephone. And typically that equipment and connectivity is supplied to them by their employer. But as I've said, while the availability of this equipment may be a necessary condition for teleworking, it's not a sufficient condition. Organisations need to support teleworking. They need to make it clear that the practice is not just permitted, but encouraged. Only if that happens will we capture the full potential of teleworking, both the economic and productivity benefits and the benefits it offers in terms of flexibility for employees. I'm pleased to say that many organisations in Australia have shown their support for teleworking. Nearly 180 organisations have become telework partners with the Department of Communications. These include many large enterprises such as Westpac, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Microsoft, Cisco, Medibank Private, GPT, National Australia Bank, Woolworths and the NRMA. All of them are using telework as part of their flexible workplace practices to drive greater efficiencies and workplace engagement in their quest for competitive advantage. There is encouraging evidence of increased productivity from telework. In the Male Champions of Change report, Listening, Learning and Leading, the Commonwealth Bank reported a 27% increase in productivity from its pilot work-at-home flexibility strategy. Research by the Institute for a Broadband-Enabled Society and the Auckland University of Technology revealed that teleworkers particularly those who combined working in the office on some days with working remotely on other days, so what are called hybrid teleworkers, were 12% more productive than non-teleworking employees. In China, a Stanford University study of a 16,000 strong call centre found that working from home led to a 13% performance increase and the job attrition rate fell by 50%. Telework also has the potential to improve workforce participation amongst groups which are underrepresented in the workforce. In particular, Australian women are amongst the most educated and skilled in the world, yet in 2011, Australia ranked only 23rd out of 34 in the OECD in the workforce participation rate of women in their childbearing years between 25 and 44. That represents a very substantial opportunity cost. And it's certainly not the case that Australian women of childbearing years want to stay out of the workforce. So it appears to be that there are some impediments. If we can offer increased flexibility, including through teleworking, that must surely be part of how we encourage more women to enter and critically to remain in the workforce. That potential seems particularly important in our big cities, where many people face long and stressful commutes to work and struggle to balance work and caring responsibilities. Dr. Ian Watt, the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, had this to say in the recently released Male Champions of Change report, quote, "We need to start from a presumption that flexible work practices are a positive part of our workplaces rather than a grudging concession. No position or level should be deemed off limits to someone interested in flexible working arrangements." And Stephen Sedgwick, the Australian Public Service Commissioner, in the same report had this to say, quotes, "There is a generational shift upon us, enabling men across our organisation to better support women and share the double burden may serve as one of the less obvious but more transformational actions we can take to advance women into leadership." Another potential benefit from telework is that it can allow cost savings. For example, knowing how many employees do not need office accommodation on particular scheduled days means a capacity to save on reduced office space requirements. The Commonwealth Bank has introduced flexible working practices. It established its activity-based working centre, Commonwealth Bank Place, in 2011 as part of a strategy that has seen the bank reduce its footprint in Sydney's CBD from 13 buildings to just 3. These working arrangements have enabled 20% more Commonwealth Bank employees to work from the purpose-built building. Another example is Microsoft, which has been able to reduce its office accommodation by around 25% through introducing flexible working practices. Teleworking can also help reduce the costs associated with recruitment and retention. The Australian Human Resource Institute has reported that for skilled employees, the replacement costs can reach 150% of the departing employee's salary. Research by Deloitte Access Economics has identified that effective implementation of teleworking arrangements can support staff retention and reduce churn. It is not just the private sector which is recognising the benefits. The New South Wales Department of Premier and Cabinet has adopted an activity-based workplace model in the search for an outcomes-based collaborative culture that is dynamic, efficient and innovative. Let me turn then to the question of telework in the Australian public service. The APS has a good track record of being at the forefront of flexible workplace practices to drive productivity and engagement in its workforce. This has long included the ability for APS executives to work from home and other remote locations using technology such as virtual desktop systems. But the APS now falls well behind the private sector in making telework a normal part of flexible workplace arrangements. The last State of the Service report indicated that only around 5% of APS employees telework for at least 1 day a week. This compares to the findings of a recent survey by the Australian Communications and Media Authority that 15% of Australians across the total workforce, private and public sector, work away from the office 1 day a week. In the past, working from home in the APS has been an option initiated by individual employees, arranged on an ad hoc basis because the employee's particular circumstances meant that they could not get into the office. It has not resulted from a planned employer initiative designed to leverage technological advancements for improved productivity. While there are very clear advantages for employees, the real drivers for telework from a management perspective are productivity and cost saving. In June of this year, 7 APS agencies signed up to conduct trials of high-speed, broadband-enabled telework, with the aim of implementing telework as a normal part of flexible workplace practices in the APS. Treasury, the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, the Australian Tax Office, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the Department of Employment, the Department of Industry and the Department of Communications are all taking part. Trial participants represent most career levels, including the senior executive, across most Australian states and territories. The trial will test the key issues associated with the broader implementation of telework across the APS. Early reporting shows that employees found it easier to concentrate in the home environment, away from many distractions and noise in the office environment. However, it is clear that we have some work to do to ensure that our ICT, that's to say our information and communications technology, adequately supports telework, with all agencies experiencing a range of IT-related issues, mainly for participants using their own devices. Several agencies have reported increased interest in telework by employees and managers outside the trial. To maximise the opportunities presented by the digital economy, both the public and the private sector need to understand how the flexible workplace of the future, including telework opportunities, fits into their strategic plans. It will require new skills and capabilities for leaders, managers and employees. To help you in gaining some of these skills, the Department of Communications, with the help of its industry partners, has produced a telework kit and a telework training program with guidelines and tools covering such issues as technology infrastructure, processes and policies, and people management. They are downloadable from the Telework website. Let me conclude by observing that the government is committed to increasing the efficiency and productivity of the national workforce, and that includes the Australian Public Service. Telework can help employees by giving them more flexibility. It can help employers through cost savings and a more productive workforce. So the case for the Australian Public Service in pursuing telework more vigorously is a strong one. I hope that you will heed the call. Thank you very much.